Hello and welcome to the QA Underground. In today's video, we will be covering part 2 of the Pygame AI Flappy Bird tutorial. And in this video, we're going to be covering mostly the neat configuration. If you are new to the channel, we create videos on machine learning, game development, and testing related tools weekly. So if that sounds good to you, I invite you to hit that subscribe button below. So let's get into it. This video is going to be a quick video. We're going to just kind of explain the configuration file that goes along with neat. Explain a couple of the important pieces to the config file that we'll need to have the AI control our Flappy Bird application that we generated in the previous video. So the way neat works is, at its very basic level, is it basically just evolves a neural network, right? So it starts out with a specific amount of inputs and outputs that you feed it, and then it starts out very basic and then evolves that neural network and adds new nodes while adjusting weights to solve the task at hand. So it will basically add complexity only when needed. However, it will attempt to architect a new network that is as simplistic as possible, right? Its goal is to make it as simplistic as possible. However, it can grow to become a complex neural network. So how this works is basically we have a couple of things that we need to cover first. The first thing that we need to cover is basically what neat needs to be able to do its job. And the first thing it needs is inputs. So inputs is probably the most important part of the neat network. Basically, we'll give it the inputs for Flappy Bird that we'll give it is our bird position. So specifically on the y-axis, as the bird isn't moving on the x-axis, right? So we have it's either going up or down. Then we need to give it the distance between the bird and the next coming top and bottom pipes, right? We need to give it the position of those pipes to be able to move forward. The next thing that neat needs is an output, right? So our output for Flappy Bird will be to jump or not to jump. It's a very simplistic application, so we know that we only need to move up or down. The third thing that it needs is an activation function. So the activation function, we're going to use the hyperbolic tangent function, which is tan h. So basically, we're going to check in between the values of -1 and 1. So as our fitness values grow, we're going to actually evaluate if it's above 0.5 or below 0.5, right? So if it is above 0.5, we're going to jump. If it's below, we're not going to jump. The next thing we need to do is population size. So this is how many birds we'll have each generation and then repopulate based off the best birds from that generation. So the population size, you could start with 10 or 20 birds in this scenario or 100 birds. The more birds you add to the population, obviously, the faster and the less generations it's going to generate, right? Because you're going to have more scenarios running at the same time. The next one is the fitness function. So this is, again, one of the most important pieces to what neat needs. And basically, it will define how the birds will get better over generations, right? So based on their fitness value that we're assigning it, the higher the fitness value, the more probability that it will repopulate into a new generation after it fails. This is really important because if you want to get the scoring right on this, because you want to make sure that the best birds that are getting through the pipes are the ones that are being repopulated for the next generation. And then the next piece is the max generations, right? This is when to quit the generation attempts. So once we reach a certain amount of generations, then we're going to actually quit and terminate the program because we don't need to keep moving forward. So what we're looking at right now is the neat configuration, specifically the neat configuration feed forward config file. So this is basically what is needed to set up the neat algorithm within Flappy Bird. So all the values in here are what is going to be pulled into the game to be able to allow the birds to run. So I'm going to give a brief overview of some of the highlights of what's in this configuration file. A lot of this is going to remain default. And a lot of this is basically defaulted from the configuration file that I got this from. So we've started at the very top, which is the neat section. So we're going to talk about the fitness criterion is basically the function to choose from min, max, and mean, right? So this is, are we taking birds with the highest fitness point or the lowest fitness point? For our scenario, we're going to be taking it with the highest fitness point because we want the bird to be scoring the best as we move through the application. So that's what we're going to choose for this one is max. The next is the fitness threshold. So what fitness level do we want to get before we terminate the program, right? So if we get a bird that has 100 for its fitness level, we can exit the program because it already is doing extremely well. So the population size or the pop size is basically how many birds do we want to start with? How many birds do we want our generation to have or include? You can set this to 10 to 20 to 100, but in general, that's where we are going to set how many birds we're going to start with. The next piece is the reset on extinction. So if a species goes extinct due to stagnation, a new population will be created. So as the generations are being populated, there's going to be lots of different species. And how species are defined within NEAT is that we start with our initial birds that have 3 inputs and 1 output, right? So as it moves along, NEAT will actually generate multiple different versions of that. So there might be some hidden layers on top of the inputs that are added. And as they differ, species will be generated for those each birds. And what it's saying here basically is that if we run out of species that no longer contain those hidden layers and those nodes and neurons, then do we want to just get rid of it and start a new species? So the next part is the default genome. So we call all of our birds genomes. So when we go to the next step and we start to code out adding NEAT or integrating NEAT into Flappy Bird, we're going to talk about genomes a lot. And that's basically our birds, right? These are the connections between the nodes. So the starting point for the population, right? This is where they're going to start from. We have our activation defaulted at 10H, which we've kind of already talked about a little bit. Let's see, what else do we have in here? Again, a lot of this stuff is defaulted, so I'm not really changing a whole lot to it. So a piece that I'm going to talk about is the connection add remove rates, right? So how likely are we to add or remove a new connection? That's just basically what that is. Connection enable options. This is, can we have connections that are active or deactivated as we move along through the neural network? Our network parameters, obviously, those are setting the default of the amount of input neurons and output neurons that are going to be generated. So that's actually one of the most important pieces to this as well, right? As we talked about, our inputs and our outputs are important. And this is really what we're starting with. So we're defining here what the number of inputs that we're going to be giving it, which is our bird position and the pipe top and bottom positions from the bird. And then our outputs. So are we going to jump or not jump? That's where that's going to be defined. And really the rest of this is just kind of, again, defaulted from the config file that I got this from. So what we do now is we just copy this config file into our root folder of the project. And then in the next video, we're going to actually go over how do we integrate NEAT into our current code, right? How do we refactor the code that we wrote in the previous video to work with NEAT? And then by the end of that video, we will have an AI-controlled Flappy Bird application. So let me know what you think of this series in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for stopping by, and I will see you on the next one.